Today we are going to discuss 10 historical murderers. The first is Jane Toppin. She was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1854 under the name Honora Kelley, the daughter of Irish immigrants. Her mother died of tuberculosis, and she was raised for the next few years by her alcoholic father, an abusive and eccentric man who was known as a crackpot by the local community and was once rumored to have sewn his own eyelids shut while working as a tailor. In 1860, her father gave her to the Boston Female Asylum, an orphanage for indigent female children. 2 years later, Honora was employed as a servant in the home of Mrs. Anne C. Toppin of Lowell, Massachusetts, and she assumed the surname of her benefactors. Her first name was changed to Jane to make it sound less Irish. From now on, she was known as Jane Toppin. She began training as a nurse at Cambridge Hospital, where she was described as well-liked, bright, and friendly, and she earned the nickname Jolly Jane. She also worked at the prestigious Massachusetts General Hospital before beginning her career as a private nurse. Jane would target elderly, helpless patients and overdose them with morphine and atropine. She would lay in bed with them and hold them close until they died. Jane later stated that she derived a sexual thrill from her patients being near death and coming back to life and then dying again. Her murder spree wasn't limited to her hospital patients. She even murdered her own foster sister named Elizabeth Brigham. One day she took Elizabeth to a picnic on a lake in Cape Cod, where she was given a bottle of Jane's favorite mineral water. The mineral water was a Hungarian brand that was laced with poison. She was really the first of my victims that I actually hated and poisoned with a vindictive purpose, Toppin confessed to the New York Journal. So I let her die slowly with gripping torture. I held her in my arms and watched with delight as she gasped her life out. Jane was eventually arrested in 1901, confessing to 31 murders in total. She claimed that her killing spree began when she was dumped by a boy at the age of 16. Had she married, she said, she would have never become a murderer. During her trial, she insisted she was not insane and knew exactly what she was doing, stating, "That is my ambition, to have killed more people, more helpless people, than any man or woman who has ever lived." Nevertheless, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. She was committed to for life in the Taunton Insane Hospital, where she died in 1938. Next we have Thomas Neill. Thomas was born in Glasgow, Scotland in 1850, but his family moved to Canada, where he ended up graduating from McGill University in Montreal. He then moved to London, England, to obtain his postdoctorate training at St. Thomas's Hospital Medical School. He then returned to Canada, where he began to practice medicine. While living in Waterloo, Quebec, Thomas began dating a young woman named Flora Banks, whom he impregnated. In order to avoid forcing her to marry him, he attempted to perform an abortion on her but failed, leaving her severely ill. As such, he was forced by Flora's father to marry her. However, the day after the wedding, Thomas fled to England and never saw Flora again. Thomas returned to North America in 1878 and established a medical practice in London, Ontario. It is here he claimed his first victim, a pregnant woman named Catherine Hutchinson Gardner, who he murdered with a handkerchief soaked in chloroform. Over the course of his career, he murdered up to 10 people in 3 countries, targeting mostly lower-class women, prostitutes, and pregnant women seeking abortions. His drug of choice was strychnine, or however you say that. He was finally caught in 1881 after he poisoned a man named Daniel Stott, the husband of his mistress, Julia Stott. Daniel's friends erected a tombstone at Stott's grave which reads, Daniel Stott died June 12, 1881, age 61 years, poisoned by his wife and Dr. Cream. Thomas was convicted, but he was released in 1891 after Governor Joseph F. Pfeiffer commuted his sentence after Thomas's brother allegedly bribed authorities and pleaded for leniency. After his release, his streak of murders continued, but he was again arrested in 1892. He was tried and found guilty on all accounts and sentenced to death by hanging. According to the hangman, Thomas's last words on the scaffold were, "I am Jack," a reference to the infamous unidentified serial killer active in London in 1888. However, Thomas was in prison during the time the Ripper was active, so historians cast serious doubt on his claims. Number 3. Peter Stumpp. Peter was born in Bedburg, Germany around the year 1530. At the age of 12, he began practicing black magic and sorcery, conjuring into existence a succubus with whom he had repeated sexual intercourse. He said the succubus came to him and gave him the ability to commune with the devil himself, and that the devil gave him a magical belt that enabled Peter to morph into the likeness of a greedy, devouring wolf, strong and mighty, with eyes great and large, which in the night sparkle like fire, a great mouth, wide, with most sharp and cruel teeth, a huge body, and mighty paws. When the belt was removed, Peter morphed back into his human form. By 1580, Peter was a prosperous farmer and widower with 2 children, 1 son and 1 daughter. The farmers of Bedburg noticed that their cows were being mysteriously slaughtered in the fields. Even worse, numerous women and children in the village started to go missing. This was because Stumpp was drinking their blood and eating them. He later said he had a taste for human blood and flesh, and would hunt his prey before luring them in, sometimes by asking for help. Then he would tear their bodies apart, just as he had done to the livestock. His spree of pure evil continued for 25 years. He later confessed to killing and eating 14 children and 2 pregnant women, whose fetuses he ripped from their wombs and ate, their hearts panting hot and raw. One of the 14 children was his own son, whose brain he was reported to have devoured. He was executed on October 31st, 1589. His public execution was one of the most brutal in recorded history. He was strapped to a wagon wheel, had his skin burned off in 10 places with red-hot pincers, and his arms and legs were broken with the blunt side of an axe. Finally, he was beheaded, and his body was burned on a pile. Local authorities mounted his head onto a pole to serve as a warning to others who dared to engage in such evil behavior. Number 4. La Quintrala. Born as Catalina de los Rios Lisperguer in Santiago, Chile in 1604, the daughter of a wealthy family of landowners of Spanish and German descent who were members of the Chilean nobility. Her father, Gonzalo, obtained the rank of general in the Royal Army and served as a mayor of Santiago. Gonzalo also owned a sugarcane plantation, using enslaved black people to perform the work. Catalina was considered a beauty with a white complexion, a tall stature, and red hair, intense green eyes. She was a mix of Amerindian, Spanish, and German blood, which gave her remarkable physical attributes that were said to, quote-unquote, make her very attractive to men, according to the chronicles of Bishop Francisco Gonzalez de Salcedo. Her fiery red hair earned her the nickname Quintrala, a type of red flower that was native to Chile and is similar to mistletoe. Unfortunately, her beauty was only skin deep. At the age of 14, she murdered her father by serving him poisoned chicken. In 1624, she invited a rich vassal from Santiago to her house. When she had him in her arms, Catalina killed him with knives and blamed the crime on a slave who was subsequently executed. It is also said that she beat and stabbed a former lover, Enriquez de Guzman of the Order of Malta, on the grounds that he had played with her feelings. She also became legendary for her poor treatment of her slaves. She was known to slash them as a hobby and killed a black slave named Natukan Jeton without any known motive. Her cruelty reached to the point that it caused her tenants to rebel and flee into the mountains, where they were subsequently captured and returned to her. It is said she once became furious because the crucified Jesus appeared to be staring accusingly at her provocative cleavage. She ordered the removal of the image, claiming that no man in her house had the right to stare and give her funny looks. Eventually, an investigation was conducted and Catalina was arrested. She was charged with around 40 murders. However, because of her family's wealth and because she was the sister-in-law of a powerful judge, her trial was stalled and she was released. Catalina fell ill and died in 1665. She was buried in the Church of San Agustin in Chile. It is said her final request was for the Augustinians to hold 20,000 annual masses in her memory at the church beside her home, an authoritarian command which is claimed, although I can't find evidence, that is still observed to this day. Next, number 5, we have Amelia Dyer. Amelia was born in 1837 near Bristol, England, the daughter of a master shoemaker. Dyer had endured a tumultuous childhood in which she was the primary caregiver for her deranged mother, who suffered with violent fits. At the age of 24, she married George Thomas, a man 35 years her senior, and began training as a nurse. George died 8 years later, and Amelia needed income, so she turned to the Victorian practice known as baby farming, this historical practice of accepting custody of an infant or child in exchange for payment. Sadly, to reduce costs and maintain profitability, some caregivers resorted to intentionally starving babies, which sometimes resulted in death. Demanding and noisy babies were often sedated with tinctures of alcohol and opiates, with one of the most popular brands being colloquially known as Mother's Friend. This powerful tincture would cause babies to have reduced appetites, leading to severe malnutrition and death. Amelia advertised her clients in the newspaper that she was a respectable woman who would provide a safe and loving home for the child. However, she had no such intentions. At some point in her baby farming career, Dyer decided to forego the expense and inconvenience of letting children die through neglect and starvation, and instead she murdered them directly, usually through strangulation, and would dispose of their bodies to avoid attention. She was eventually captured in 1879 and sentenced to only 6 months hard labor. Amelia continued her murder spree upon her release, but suffered from mental illness, suicidal tendencies, and drug addiction, which led her to several stints in the mental hospital. In 1896, Amelia adopted Doris Marmon, the illegitimate daughter of a 25-year-old bartender, assuring the mother, quote-unquote, "I should be glad to have a dear baby girl, one I could bring up and call my own. We are plain, homely people in fairly good circumstances. I don't want a child for money's sake, but for the company and home comforts. I and my husband are dearly fond of children. I have no children of my own. A child with me will have a good home and a mother's love." Instead, Dyer wrapped tape around the baby's neck and tied it into a knot. The following day, she murdered a 13-month boy named Harry Simmons with the same piece of tape. She is later quoted as having said, "I used to watch them with the tape around their neck, but it was soon all over with them." She loaded the bodies into a carpet bag, added bricks for weight, and tossed it into the River Thames. She was eventually caught when the body of another child was discovered in the Thames by a bargeman. The police raided her home on Good Friday, 1896. She was subsequently tried, and the jury found her guilty after only 4 minutes of deliberation. Dyer was hanged by James Billington at Newgate Prison on Wednesday, June 10, 1896. Asked on the scaffold if she had anything to say, Her last words were, "I have nothing to say." Her confirmed death count stands at 6, but historians estimate it is likely in the range of 200 to 400 babies murdered. Number 6. Gilles de Rais. He was a soldier and nobleman born in France around the year 1405. From 1427 to 1435, Rais served as a commander in the Royal Army, distinguishing himself for bravery on the battlefield during the renewal of the 100 Years' War. He even fought alongside Joan of Arc in some campaigns waged against the English and their Burgundian allies, and he was present with Joan when the English siege of Orleans was defeated. After his military career drew to conclusion, his lifestyle grew decadent, and he began to squander his fortune. He worked on an elaborate theatrical production, a play consisting of more than 20,000 lines, 140 speaking parts, and 500 extras. This caused him great financial distress, leading him to sell nearly all of his estates. In 1435, a royal edict was proclaimed denouncing Rais as a spendthrift and forbidding him to sell any more property. He was advised by local sorcerers to engage in the occult in hopes of raising demons to reestablish his finances. He contacted an Italian priest and alchemist named Prelati for assistance, and they met 3 times at his chateau in an attempt to summon a demon named Baron. When they failed all 3 times, Prelati said the demon was angry and required offerings of parts of a child. Rais is said to have sodomized and murdered between 100 and 200 children. He would strip them naked, hang them upside down from a hook to prevent the child from crying out, and then masturbated upon the child's belly or thighs. Taking the victim down, Rais then comforted the child and assured him he only wanted to play with him, at which point the child would be decapitated. According to his own testimony, when the said children were dead, he kissed them, and those who had the most handsome limbs and heads he held up to admire them, and had their bodies cruelly cut open, and took delight at the sight of their inner organs, and very often when the children were dying, he sat on their stomachs and took pleasure in seeing them die and laughed. In his 1971 biography of Rais, Jean Benedetti tells how the children who fell into Rais's hands were put to death, stating, "The boy was pampered and dressed in better clothes than he had ever known. The evening begun with a large meal and heavy drinking, which acted as a stimulant. The boy was taken to an upper room to which Rais and his immediate circle were admitted. There he was confronted with the truth of the nature of his situation. The shock thus produced on the boy was an initial source of pleasure for Rais. Rais went too far in 1440 when he kidnapped a cleric, which prompted an investigation by the Bishop of Nantes, or Nantes, however you say that, during which the evidence Rais's crimes were uncovered. His trial lasted only 5 days and culminated with him being found guilty of murder and unnatural vice with children. Sentenced to death, he was executed by hanging and burning on October 26th. Next we have the infamous Elizabeth Bathory. Countess Elizabeth Bathory was a noblewoman from a prominent land-owning family in the Kingdom of Hungary. In 1573, she was engaged to Count Ferdinand Nadasi, a member of a noble family. He was a wedding gift to Bathory, and his castle, situated in the Little Carpathian Mountains, became hers. 3 years later, he left to fight in the war against the Ottomans, and Bathory was left to manage his estate and business affairs, which included providing medical care for the Hungarian and Slovak people. It is here she began to torture and kill young girls in the most sadistic ways. She is believed that drinking the blood of young girls would help preserve her youthful looks, and witnesses told of her stabbing victims or biting their breasts and cutting them with scissors and sticking them with needles in their lips or burning them with red-hot irons, coins, or keys. Rumors began to spread that she bathed in her victims' blood to maintain her youthful appearance. At first, her victims were servants in her castles, daughters of local peasants. Later, she progressed to murdering the young daughters who were sent to her for manners training and etiquette training by their families, usually members of landed gentry or minor nobility. A Lutheran minister became suspicious and reported her to the authorities. An investigation was begun in 1816. She was found guilty, and it is estimated that she murdered somewhere around 650 people. She was ordered to be detained in her castle for the remainder of her life, where she died at the age of 54. According to one source, she was immured, or bricked up inside of a small space, but according to other sources, she was able to move freely and unhindered throughout her castle. Number 8. Karl Denke. Karl was born in 1860 in the Kingdom of Prussia to a family of German farmers. He tried his hand at farming but failed, and instead found some success operating a shop that sold meat. He volunteered as a cross-bearer and organist at the local Lutheran church and was well liked in his community, often affectionately referred to as Papa by the community. He is believed to have sold the flesh of his victims as meat to unsuspecting customers, to which he advertised as pork. He began, for unknown reasons, murdering homeless vagrants and poor travelers. His first known victim was Ida Launer in 1903. 6 years later, in 1909, he killed 25-year-old Emma Sander. His luck ran out in 1924 when a homeless man named Vincent Oliver escaped from Denke's clutches, albeit with an axe wound in his head. He was found by a local coachman who alerted the authorities. Denke was arrested and questioned. He was placed in a holding cell where he hanged himself just hours later. Denke's home was later searched and police found the gruesome truth of his murders and cannibalism. The police found a ledger that Denke kept in which he recorded the names of 31 victims. However, due to the large number of body parts found in the home, it is believed the body count is estimated around 42. Decades later, this remains mostly forgotten. Still, much about Denke's life, motives, methods, and even the exact number of victims remains unknown. Next we have number 9, Marcel Patois. Marcel was born in France in 1897. Little is known about his early life except for his many petty crimes and disciplinary issues, including firing his father's gun in school, sexually harassing a girl in his class, and robbing a postbox. He was ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation, resulting in charges being dropped when it was discovered he had a mental illness. He volunteered for the French army in World War I and was wounded and gassed during the Second Battle of Aisne. He was sent to various rest homes before ending up in a psychiatric hospital where he was diagnosed with mental illness. He completed medical school in 8 months and began working for a mental hospital where he gained a reputation for dubious medical practice, such as supplying narcotics and performing illegal abortions as well as petty theft. He ran for mayor of his own town and sent somebody to disrupt a political debate with his opponent. He ended up winning the race, and while in office, he embezzled town funds. In 1936, he was briefly institutionalized for kleptomania. But during World War II, he took advantage of the times by recruiting 3 accomplices to help him run a con in which he would create a fake escape network to South America. His accomplices would meet and route fugitives of the Nazi and Vichy governments to him. He would then lie and tell them he could smuggle them into South America through Portugal for a fee of 25 grand francs. He told his victims that Argentina required immunization. Through this ruse, he successfully killed his victims with injections of cyanide and then he dumped their bodies into the Seine River or he burned them at his home. His neighbors began to complain about smells emanating from his chimney. Firemen arrived to find human bodies burning in his fire. He was imprisoned and tried, but claimed to be innocent, confessing to 63 murders in total, but insisted they were all Germans or Nazi collaborators, and he was acting as a French resistance fighter and hero by killing them. However, the police found that he had no friends in any of the major resistance movements. He was found guilty and beheaded by guillotine on May 25, 1946. And lastly, number 10, Crown Prince Sado. Sado was born in China in 1735, the son of King Yongzhou. At the age of 10, Sado suffered from severe unknown illness and oftentimes would lose consciousness. When he turned 15, his father appointed him regent, giving him the power to make decisions on administrative matters. However, the king was perpetually dissatisfied with whichever course of action his son chose. The king also made a habit to chastise his son in front of large crowds and in front of women. His mother and wife died within 1 month of each other, and Sado began to beat eunuchs as a way of dealing with his frustration. He decapitated one of his eunuchs and walked around the house holding the severed head, forcing his ladies-in-waiting to view it. Sado eventually jumped down a well in an attempt to kill himself, but one of his guards rescued him. He was also known to beat many of his lovers, and in 1761 he beat a consort named Bing Ai, who he left on the floor to die from her injuries. In 1762, Sado had an altercation with the court official. To seek revenge, Sado snuck into the palace to kill the man's son, but was unable to find the son. Fearing for the safety of children, the father and the king was forced to act. By court rules, the body of a royal could not be defiled. As a solution, the king ordered Sado to climb into a wooden rice chest on a hot July day. The rice chest was only 4 square feet in size. After being locked in the outside sun for over 2 days, the box was moved into the palace. Sado finally stopped responding from inside the box on the night of the 7th day. The king restored his title as prince, but forbid any mention of his name for the remainder of the king's reign. And if you enjoyed this video, please like or subscribe. Please comment below and let us know who on this list belongs, who we left out. Thank you very much.